That fence line running along a property's edge isn't merely a boundary marker sitting there passively. It represents the single most wasted piece of real estate found anywhere across an entire homestead property. Right now, it typically sits doing absolutely nothing productive. Maybe weeds, maybe brush, maybe rusting barbed wire. That same strip of land could instead drop over 100 pounds of livestock feed per tree planted. It could grow protein-rich leaves rivaling alfalfa while producing fruit, nuts, and medicine worth eating or selling. That gap between unused edge space and real production potential rarely gets noticed until someone measures it. This video breaks down exactly how to turn every edge of a property into a working food system. None of this requires buying a single additional square inch of land beyond what's already owned outright. By the end of this video, a full fence line planting plan featuring 7 specific paying species emerges clearly. A seasonal rotation, keeping food production running across all 12 months of the year, gets covered too. Here's an honest look at what most fence lines actually look like across the average homestead property. A boundary line doing nothing productive represents a missed opportunity. Most property owners walk past daily. Watching a feed bill climb every season while a fence line sits empty tends to force real reconsideration. 500 to 1,000 feet of edge typically runs around a property, sometimes considerably more than that. Weeds, wild brush, poison ivy, and the occasional accidental tree usually fill that entire unused space instead. Meanwhile, monthly trips to the feed store hauling expensive bags of pellets continue driving costs steadily upward. The average homesteader spends over $500 yearly on chicken feed alone under typical current pricing. Adding rabbits, goats, or sheep doubles or triples that total feed cost fairly quickly across a season. History rarely gets consulted before modern homesteaders start planning their own first fence line planting attempt. Then comes the fruit and produce side of typical household spending patterns across an average year. $4 buys a pint of blueberries. $6 buys a small bag of elderberry syrup at the store. $20 buys a bottle of tincture, whose main ingredient often grows wild somewhere nearby regardless. That fence line sits empty the entire time, producing nothing while quietly costing real money in missed output. Older generations rarely wasted usable ground, treating every edge as a genuine extension of their working farm. Most homesteaders got taught that a property's middle represents where all genuine production actually happens. Old agricultural records rediscovered decades later prove this approach once had serious mainstream institutional backing. The garden goes in the sunniest spot, animals go in the pasture, and the fence line simply stays fence line. The edges of a property actually represent where genuinely highest value production could happen instead. Commercial agriculture spent roughly 70 years quietly teaching most people to forget that specific older lesson entirely. Farmers understood this centuries ago, long before tractors, row crops, and modern supply chains ever existed. Small farms across Europe, Asia, and colonial America were historically built directly around productive property edges. A single tree species, chosen deliberately, can outproduce years of scattered, unplanned fence line neglect entirely. English hedgerows produced firewood, timber, fruit, livestock feed, and wild medicine from strips barely 8 feet wide. Japanese farming villages historically built entire communities around edge planting, layering nut trees and protein shrubs together. Starting with just 2 species and mastering them fully tends to build far more confidence than rushing 7 at once. American Extension bulletins from the 1920s and 30s specifically urged farmers to plant honeylocust along fence lines. A single well-chosen tree can quietly outperform an entire season of scattered, unplanned garden expansion elsewhere. Those trees dropped pods packed with sugar and protein, exactly where livestock needed them during scarce winter months. A regional agricultural authority even ran a formal contest during the 1930s, hunting for the best fodder trees. Winning cultivars could produce over 100 pounds of pods per tree annually under proper growing conditions. Watching pods drop exactly when winter feed grows scarce reveals how deliberately these older systems were designed. Something shifted dramatically after World War II, as cheap oil and new machinery pushed everything toward row crops. Government subsidies reinforced that shift, and old contest records eventually got boxed up and largely forgotten. Elite fodder trees got forgotten, and this entire fence-line food system quietly disappeared from common knowledge. The underlying biology never actually changed, though. Honeylocust trees still reliably drop their pods every single year. Mulberry leaves still test at 18 to 28% crude protein, rivaling mid-grade alfalfa hay. Livestock harvesting their own feed removes an entire category of labor most modern operations still pay for. Hazelnut bushes still produce 15 to 20 pounds of nuts yearly, without requiring any purchased inputs whatsoever. Livestock doing their own harvesting work removes a labor cost most modern feeding systems still require. A grafted variety chosen deliberately over cheap seed stock is a small upfront decision with years of payoff. These same trees still stand along forgotten fence lines across the entire country, quietly waiting to be used. First, Honeylocust, the winter protein source that essentially drops itself directly into a waiting pasture. Planting just one tree along a fence line this year should genuinely be Honeylocust above anything else. A mature Honeylocust drops over 100 pounds of pods yearly, sometimes considerably more on older trees. That kind of self-harvesting system rarely gets discussed compared to more labor-intensive feeding methods commonly used. Planting 35 trees along a fence line realistically produces 2 to 3 tons of livestock feed per acre. That output compares favorably to a decent cornfield's yield, without any tractor passes or diesel fuel required. Those pods pack carbohydrates alongside 7 to 13% protein, sitting right in the target range for wintering livestock. Ground into meal, that protein content climbs to roughly 20% under proper processing conditions. Pods ripen in late fall, dropping just as first snows arrive, exactly when pasture goes dormant seasonally. A tree responding to hard cutting with even faster growth defies what most gardeners initially expect. Fast regrowth after hard pruning is exactly the trait that makes coppicing such an efficient feeding strategy. That timing matches precisely when feed bills typically spike hardest across most livestock operations each winter. Animals genuinely harvest themselves directly, requiring no baling, no hauling, and no additional storage space whatsoever. Cattle crunch whole pods easily, while goats and sheep clean up remaining fragments left behind afterward. The ground stays productive year after year without requiring any additional replanting or maintenance work involved. Ordering thornless grafted cultivars rather than seed-grown trees matters enormously for reliable pod production quality. Chickens competing for fallen fruit under one tree says more about its value than any nutrition chart could. Spacing trees 15 to 20 feet apart along a fence line, planted in fall or early spring, works best. Second, mulberry, functioning essentially as alfalfa reimagined in tree form for backyard livestock feeding purposes. A fence line that once grew nothing but weeds becoming a genuine income source is proof this approach works. Mulberry represents the genuine sleeper hit of fence line planting that almost nobody actively discusses enough. Leaves test at 18 to 28% crude protein with digestibility comparable to mid-grade alfalfa hay. That protein content beats most cover crops and most standard hay varieties grown for typical livestock feeding. A market willing to pay premium prices for something grown wild nearby represents real, accessible opportunity. Protein content this high from a tree, rather than a purchased bag, changes how feed budgets get calculated. This tree regrows aggressively every single time it gets cut back hard through a technique called coppicing. Chickens go genuinely wild for mulberry leaves, while rabbits eat them faster than anyone could realistically pick them. Goats and sheep will strip an entire branch clean within under a single minute of active browsing. The berries themselves function as a genuine bonus, purple, sweet, and dropping steadily for weeks during late spring. Chickens will genuinely camp under a fruiting mulberry tree throughout that entire productive fruiting season each year. Excess berries make excellent homemade wine, jam, or dried fruit through simple home preservation methods. A hedge doing double duty as windbreak and income source is rare efficiency worth designing an entire fence around. Coppicing 3 trees each summer, cutting them back to roughly 4 feet, produces reliable regrowth by fall. That regrowth typically reaches 6 to 8 feet tall again within just one single growing season. Drying leaves like loose tea and feeding them out through winter provides real, measurable livestock nutrition value. Free propagation from existing plants means expansion never has to wait on a tight seasonal budget. Getting quality mulberry cuttings and rooting them in damp sand for roughly 8 weeks starts this entire process. Planting rooted cuttings 10 feet apart along a fence line establishes a productive mulberry hedge over time. Nut production. This reliable from minimal input explains why hazelnut hedges deserve more attention than they usually get. Third, hazelnut, the hedge that quietly writes, checks through steady, reliable nut production over many years. Hazelnut hedges represent the quiet income producer that most homesteaders genuinely overlook entirely too often. A single mature hazelnut bush produces 15 to 20 pounds of nuts yearly under proper growing conditions. Planting 50 bushes along 500 feet of fence line realistically produces 750 to 1,000 pounds annually. At current market prices running $8 to $12 per pound retail, that represents serious realistic income potential. Wind reduction alone paying for itself in reduced feed costs is a detail most homesteaders never calculate. That income comes entirely from a strip of land that was previously sitting completely unused regardless. Hazelnuts grow as multi-stem shrubs, forming a dense hedge that functions as windbreak and wildlife corridor simultaneously. Wind reduction benefits reach far beyond a single hedge, protecting every animal sheltering behind it through winter. Spacing planned correctly from the very first day avoids the costly rework crowded plantings often require later. They tolerate genuinely poor soil, handle drought once established, and start producing within 3 to 4 years. A hazelnut hedge also creates a still air corridor along a pasture edge, offering real practical value. A steady 10 to 20 mile per hour wind can double the calories an animal needs through winter. A shrub producing both food and medicine from the same planting effort is efficiency worth taking seriously. Breaking that wind with a proper hedge drops feed costs measurably across an entire flock or herd. Getting grafted hybrid varieties resistant to eastern filbert blight matters enormously for long-term hedge health. None of this requires rare land or unusual climate, just ordinary boundary space put to deliberate use. Spacing plants 4 to 6 feet apart and pruning out the oldest stems every 3 years maintains production. Hazelnut hedges also become genuine wildlife magnets within just a couple years of establishment, boosting nearby garden yields. Fourth, elderberry. Essentially a medicine cabinet growing directly along a fence line for very little effort. Demand outpacing supply year after year signals a market opportunity most fence lines are perfectly positioned to fill. Elderberry represents the point where fence line planting genuinely stops being a hobby and starts becoming real business. A plant offering both nutrition and natural health support doubles its value compared to a single-purpose crop. A single mature elderberry bush produces 12 to 15 pounds of berries yearly under proper care. Those berries sell fresh for $4 to $8 per pound through typical direct sale channels currently. Turned into syrup, tincture, or dried berries, that value jumps to $15, $30, sometimes $50 per pound. Elderberry grows fast, propagates easily, and hits full production within just 2 to 3 years of planting. Free plants propagated from a single mature bush prove this system doesn't require significant upfront capital. It packs vitamin C, antioxidants, and immune-supporting compounds, driving one of the fastest-growing herbal markets nationally. Demand consistently outpaces supply nearly every single year across most regional markets currently. These plants prove nearly indestructible, tolerating wet feet, poor soil, partial shade, and even hard pruning easily. An entire hedge can get propagated from cuttings taken off just one single mature plant, entirely free. Taking 12-inch hardwood cuttings in late winter and simply sticking them into the ground starts this process. Watering through that first summer alone typically establishes a reliably productive elderberry planting going forward. Nitrogen shared freely with neighboring plants turns one modest shrub into a benefit for the entire planting. A tree solving a livestock health problem most owners quietly struggle with deserves more attention than it gets. Fifth, willow. Offering natural parasite control most livestock owners quietly struggle with every single summer season. Willow along a fence line manages livestock parasite pressure naturally in a way no other tree on this list matches. Willow leaves contain natural tannins and salicylates that slow parasite reproduction within a browsing animal's gut. Research shows fecal egg counts improve across herds once willow leaf gets added at 1 to 2 pounds daily. Protein content sits around 12 to 16%, lower than mulberry, but paired with real medicinal value instead. Fast growth paired with genuine medicinal value is a rare combination worth prioritizing in any planting plan. Willow also ranks among the fastest growing trees found anywhere, with cuttings reaching 6 feet within 1 season. Coppicing willow hard produces even faster regrowth, establishing a functioning fence line planting within a single year. Bonus uses include basketry, garden trellises, biochar production, living fences, and erosion control on consistently wet spots. Taking 12-inch hardwood cuttings from a mature willow in late winter and burying them halfway works well. A border strip cut repeatedly across a season proves some plants reward regular harvesting rather than resting. Watering only if soil dries out completely keeps maintenance requirements genuinely minimal across an entire growing season. A cutting establishing itself within 1 single season removes much of the patience typically required for tree planting. 6th, Seaberry, sometimes called sea buckthorn, functioning as the genuine multitasking champion of fence line planting. This plant fixes nitrogen in the soil through root nodules, actually fertilizing surrounding ground as it grows. Planting it beside fruit trees or berry bushes gives those neighboring plants free nitrogen for the seaberry's entire life. That kind of deliberate use is really what separates a thriving homestead from one quietly bleeding money. The berries themselves rank among the highest vitamin C sources found anywhere, roughly 15 times an orange's content. They're loaded with omega-7 fatty acids, driving strong demand across health food markets currently expanding. Nitrogen fixed for free changes the entire calculation for anything planted nearby that benefits from richer soil. Fresh berries sell for $12 to $20 per pound wherever they can actually be found for sale. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules pull nitrogen from the air, converting it into a form plants can use. Any plant growing within that root zone genuinely benefits from that free, ongoing nitrogen fertilization process. Minerals pulled up from deep soil layers rarely get discussed, yet they quietly enrich everything grown nearby. A tree guard costing just a few dollars can prevent losing an entire season's planting to a single hungry deer. Buying named cultivars rather than seed matters enormously, since both male and female plants are needed for pollination. Planting 1 male for every 6 to 8 females, spaced 6 to 8 feet apart, works well in full sun. Vitamin content this high from a hedge, rather than a supplement bottle, is easy to underestimate until measured. These plants tolerate almost any soil type, including salty, sandy, or rocky ground, where little else grows. These plants do carry thorns and sucker aggressively, requiring a mow strip or dedicated containment zone nearby. Apple trees planted downwind of an established seaberry hedge have shown noticeably increased fruit production the following year. 7th and final, a comfrey border strip, functioning as the genuine understory workhorse of this entire system. Every single fence line should genuinely end with a comfrey border strip planted along its entire length. Watching a neighboring fruit tree respond to nearby nitrogen fixation is proof this system works as designed. Planted once, comfrey produces reliably for a decade or more without requiring any replanting whatsoever. A single established plant can get cut 5 to 6 times across one growing season reliably. 6 years of steady, compounding results prove this approach rewards patience far more than any quick fix could. It regrows aggressively after every single cutting, while performing 4 distinct jobs simultaneously across an entire property. Feed crop, compost activator, mineral accumulator, and living mulch all describe this one remarkably versatile plant. Comfrey sends taproots 6 to 10 feet deep into subsoil, pulling up calcium, potassium, and trace minerals. Those minerals end up concentrated in the leaves, ready for cutting and feeding to chickens or rabbits directly. A plant performing 4 separate jobs at once is rare efficiency worth building an entire border strip around. Laying cut leaves onto garden beds, as mulch cycles those same minerals directly back into an entire food system. Ordering a variety that doesn't spread by seed keeps this plant exactly where it originally gets planted. Spacing plants 3 feet apart in a single row along a fence base establishes this entire border easily. Watering once at planting, then simply cutting and feeding starting in year 2, completes this entire process. 6 years ago, fence lines seemed like nothing more than simple property boundaries requiring no real thought. Deep taproots reaching minerals other plants never touch explains why this particular border strip earns its place. A fence line transformed gradually tends to hold up better than one planted all at once under pressure. A property just over 2 acres included roughly 900 feet of perimeter fence around its entire boundary. Every single foot of that fence line sat doing nothing productive, just weeds, brush, and a couple scraggly cedars. Real money was quietly bleeding out through purchased hay every winter and purchased feed every single month. Every property already has edges sitting unused somewhere, waiting for someone willing to plant them properly. Grocery store produce filled remaining gaps since the garden simply couldn't keep the family fed through cold months. Genuine skepticism surrounded the entire concept of fence line planting at first, sounding too good on paper. Real numbers tracked across several years carry more weight than any single optimistic projection made early on. Real production seemingly required real dedicated land, or so that early assumption genuinely suggested at the time. Desperation eventually won out though, leading to actually trying this approach despite lingering initial doubts. 12 Honeylocust seedlings went in along the east fence first, costing roughly $180 total. That same fall, 6 free mulberry cuttings came from a generous neighbor willing to share established stock. The following spring, 30 willow cuttings went straight into the ground along a consistently wet corner. Real skepticism overcome through actual results carries more weight than any confident claim made before trying it. Starting small and expanding gradually tends to produce better long-term results than attempting everything at once. 2 years in, mulberry trees started producing genuinely feedable leaves for the first time since planting. 3 years in, the first Honeylocust pods dropped, and livestock cleaned every single one up within days. 4 years in, an added elderberry hedge produced enough berries to sell $400 worth locally. That same harvest still left plenty extra for stocking a household pantry through the following winter months. This most recent year involved buying exactly 0 hay, with chicken feed bills dropping by more than half. Avoiding these specific mistakes early saves years of frustration compared to learning each one the hard way. Fruit, nuts, and medicine now come reliably from the exact same fence line that once grew only weeds. That fence line became the single most productive strip of land per square foot across the entire property. Now for the mistakes most homesteaders make when first attempting fence line planting themselves without guidance. First mistake, planting from seed instead of grafted stock or properly named cultivars for reliable production. 12 seedlings costing under $200 proves this system doesn't require a large upfront investment. Checking pollination needs before ordering plants is a 5-minute step that saves years of wondering why nothing fruits. A seed-grown honeylocust might turn out thorny and genuinely unproductive despite years of patient waiting. Grafted stock costing slightly more upfront routinely saves years of waiting for unreliable seed-grown alternatives. A seed-grown hazelnut might take 12 years before producing anything worth harvesting at all. A seed-grown seaberry might turn out entirely male or entirely female, producing no fruit whatsoever. Spending the extra money up front for grafted, named varieties saves 5 to 10 years of frustrated waiting. Second mistake, planting too close to the actual fence line itself without accounting for eventual mature size. Every species covered here will grow considerably larger than most people initially expect during early planning. Planting at least 4 to 6 feet off the fence preserves access to both sides comfortably. Proper spacing planned early prevents the crowding and access problems that plague many first attempts at this. Leaving a mow strip between plantings and any adjacent pasture also prevents aggressive suckering into grazing areas. Third mistake, skipping proper protection on new plantings during their genuinely vulnerable first few years. Watching livestock clean up fallen pods within days is the kind of proof that converts even committed skeptics. Deer, rabbits, and voles can destroy young trees within a single night without adequate protective measures. That's really the entire lesson worth carrying forward from this whole breakdown of fence line planting. Tree tubes, hardware cloth cages, or plastic tree guards should protect every new planting for 2 to 3 years. This particular protective step should never get skipped under any circumstances during initial establishment. Simple physical protection during those first vulnerable years prevents losses that would otherwise derail an entire planting. Fourth mistake: ignoring specific pollination requirements that vary considerably across different fence line species covered here. Seaberry specifically needs both male and female plants present nearby for any fruit production to occur. Some hazelnut and mulberry varieties self-pollinate reliably, while others genuinely require a second compatible variety nearby. Elderberry also produces noticeably better fruit when two different compatible cultivars get planted together deliberately. Reading pollination requirements carefully before purchasing prevents years of confused waiting for fruit that never comes. Understanding pollination needs before purchasing prevents years of confusion over plants that never actually produce fruit. Fifth mistake: attempting all 7 species simultaneously within a single planting season without proper pacing. A single season's harvest, covering both sales and personal stock, shows how quickly this system starts paying back. Starting with just 2 species, mastering their care, then adding 2 more the following year works better. Fence line planting genuinely compounds over time, but only for those who avoid burning out too early. Avoiding these 5 specific mistakes helps any fence line planting stay genuinely on schedule for production. Picture a fence line exactly like this one, 5 years after this entire system gets properly established. Pacing a multi-year planting plan avoids the burnout that trying to do everything in one season often causes. Winter feed drops itself reliably every October through January, without requiring any additional purchased hay whatsoever. The hay bill drops to a genuine fraction of what it previously cost across an entire winter season. Chickens forage steadily through spring and summer on mulberry leaves and elderberry drops without much additional feeding. Rabbits and other small livestock get high protein browse without needing a single bag of purchased pellets. Pasture stays sheltered from wind, cutting feed costs measurably across an entire herd through winter months. A fence line producing steadily after several years proves patience was the real investment all along. Dropping hay purchases to 0 after several years marks the point where a system truly sustains itself. Fresh berries, nuts, and medicinal harvests provide food to eat, store, and sell throughout the year. Soil improves steadily every year as nitrogen fixers and deep-rooted comfrey continuously feed the surrounding ground. Fruit trees produce noticeably more thanks to the pollination boost provided by flowering species along the fence. None of this required purchasing a single additional inch of land beyond the property already owned. It simply required actually using a strip of land that was already sitting there, unused all along. That kind of quiet, compounding production rarely photographs well, but it consistently outperforms flashier, rushed attempts. That represents the genuine difference between a homestead that quietly drains resources and one that pays back instead. The edges of any property genuinely represent where real, overlooked value has been hiding the entire time. So, here is a genuine question worth sitting with. Which of these 7 species would get planted first? Drop that answer in the comments below, since every single one gets read and genuinely considered afterward. If this changed how a fence line gets looked at, hitting subscribe brings new breakdowns like this weekly. That fence line is already there, waiting patiently. It simply needs the right species planted along it now.